Hello all, my name is Jason Ellis and I'm an assistant professor of English at City Tech. I'd like to talk with you about homegrown archival processing, or my experience with the City Tech Science Fiction Collection, a 600 plus linear foot collection of science fiction magazines, anthologies, novels, and scholarship. I would like to share some of my work in special collections that informs my approaches to making this collection accessible, share how City Tech acquired its SF collection, and explore the tools and strategies we use to process the collection. While I stumbled into my role as archivist, I have done my best to integrate the City Tech science fiction collection into the spirit of the college. Additionally, I have worked to build bridges from it to the wider academic and public communities. I've been lucky to have a supportive administration, great colleagues, and cool students who have all helped with this work. Before discussing how we process the City Tech science fiction collection, I would like to contextualize my experiences with some of the other big SF collections. My introduction to collections was the Georgia Tech Science Fiction Collection when I was an undergraduate there. It holds over 10,000 novels and anthologies and more than 1,000 periodicals. It also holds manuscripts and an extensive fanzine collection, too. It was formerly known as the Bud Foote Science Fiction Collection, whose namesake taught Georgia Tech's first SF class in 1971 and donated all of his books to inaugurate the collection in 1998. It has since grown much larger. The thing that I wanted to mention relates to the important protests now taking place against racism and police violence. Professor Foote was a folk and jazz musician. When he had his first apartment in Atlanta in the late 1950s and early 1960s, he invited touring black musicians there to practice before their shows, because many mid-century clubs in Atlanta were segregated and did not permit black musicians into the building except for their performances. Were he still alive, I like to think he would be out in the streets right now. Another big SF collection is the University of Liverpool's Science Fiction Hub, which is billed as Europe's largest cataloged SF collection with 35,000 books, 2,500 critical works, 2,500 periodicals, and collected papers and correspondence from Brian Aldiss, which is actually a supplement to his material held at the Bodleian Library, John Bruner, Ellen Datlow, Eric Frank Russell, and John Wyndham. I earned my master's in science fiction studies from Liverpool, and I made extensive use of the collection in my coursework and thesis. A special privilege for graduate students is the ability to check out items from the collection. The third big SF collection that I've used is the J. Lloyd Eaton Collection of Science Fiction and Fantasy at the University of California, Riverside. The Eaton Collection has over 300,000 items, including over 100,000 books, nearly 100,000 fanzines, complete runs of many pulp magazines, and literary papers from more than 30 writers, including Poul Anderson, Ben Bova, Nalo Hopkinson, Anne McCaffrey, and Werner Vinge. Based on these experiences, I gave some thought to the work of collections, meaning in part, what are collections, who uses them, and what role do they serve at the institutions where they reside. But it also means the work of collections, meaning how are they stored and organized, how are they inventoried and cataloged, and how do they serve as anchors for special events such as Georgia Tech's Frankenstein Penetrating the Secrets of Nature exhibit and speaker events in 2004, featuring science fiction writer Kathleen Angunen, whose advice to me on that day inadvertently led to me being where I am right now, something that I always remind her of when I see her. Or, in the same token, the biannual Eaton Conference at UC Riverside, which is anchored by their special collection. Considering the specific context of City Tech, I thought about how the collection fit into the college's mission, which is a very different kind of school than those with SF collections that I was familiar with. City Tech is a minority-serving urban commuter institution focusing on interdisciplinarity and multidisciplinarity, emphasizing praxis with a grounding in theory, and also place-based learning. Our campus has extremely limited space, and many spaces serve multiple purposes, such as the room adjacent to the archives is a classroom which limits when the archives can be accessed or when readers can make use of materials in the archives. Personnel is another limited resource. CityTech's president, Russell K. Hotzler, runs a tight ship with more faculty and fewer HEOs and support staff. While this is a good policy for maximizing the faculty-student ratio, it means that, like space, faculty personnel perform multiple roles to support the overall functioning of the college and divide their time between these multiple roles. What turned my attention to thinking about SF collections in this holistic way was a tremendous opportunity. An anonymous donor in California reached out to my former colleagues, in here Alan Lovegreen, about finding a home for their 600 linear foot collection of science fiction magazines, anthologies, novels, and scholarship. Alan asked me to collaborate with him on the proposal, and then we began seeking support from the administration, including Provost Bonnie August and Dean Justin Vasquez Portitz, and the library, including support from head librarian Morris Small and librarians Morris Hunian, Ann Leonard, and Keith Mikowski, before going to the CityTech Foundation with a grant proposal for $5,000 to pay for shipping the collection to the college. Due to how lean the CityTech ship is run, it was all hands on deck to move, store, shelve, and catalog the collection after we got approval for the grant and we made the arrangements to move things. Alan flew out to California to supervise shipping. When the 160 boxes of books arrived in Brooklyn, we found temporary storage in our shared office spaces. As you can see here, we quickly ran out of our normal usable floor space in our respective offices. After the library gave Alan and I the go-ahead, we began moving and shelving the materials in its new quarters in the library's archives. Luckily, I had purchased a heavy-duty equipment cart for another project to move vintage computers from the Voorhees building to the NAM building a few blocks away. This was incredibly useful for taking about 6 book boxes at a time, strapped down and weighted heavily at the bottom for a low center of gravity, from our offices on the 5th floor of NAM to the 4th floor entrance of the library, and then up an interior elevator to the 5th floor of the library where the archives are located. We surveyed the space available and immediately noticed water stains on the back wall and rust on the metal shelves from previous exposure to water. HVAC and other utilities snake above the archives room and its drop ceiling. While we had no control over that, we could see which shelves were at the most risk of water if there were a problem again. We put easier to replace monographs on those shelves and everything else further away. In order to minimize movement of the fragile materials in the collection, the main types of materials were grouped together: monographs, anthologies, magazines, journals, and novels, in zones on the available shelves. Magazines were clustered around title, but were not arranged by date. I figured that the best way to handle the materials less and save time was to build the catalog around where the items ultimately ended up on the shelves. After several months, almost all 160 boxes of material were shelved, but some leftover boxes of horror and mystery magazines remained boxed until more shelf space could be made available in the archives. It was already a Herculean task for the librarians to make as much space available as they did. It would take some time before more space was available. After helping with shelving the collection, Alan had to move back to California, unfortunately. He now teaches at Orange Coast College, but he visited CityTech back in 2018 for an invited talk, and he and I went to the Intrepid Air and Space Museum afterwards. In the next phase of this presentation, I'd like to focus on the tools that we use to process and promote the CityTech science fiction collection. William Gibson's often invoked aphorism in his writing, "The street finds its own use for things," was in the back of our minds throughout this process. In particular, how to leverage what is free, multi-purpose, and extensible to get the collection usable as quickly as possible. After receiving the foundation grant to move the collection from California to Brooklyn, but before the books had actually arrived, I created a website for science fiction at CityTech on our open source digital platform for learning, working, and sharing called OpenLab. The Science Fiction at City Tech site serves as a locus for all SF-related goings-on at the college, with a special emphasis on the City Tech science fiction collection. I wanted the site to be open and transparent so that it more easily enabled others to see what we're doing that's SF-related and allow them to get involved with as few barriers as possible. And I wanted to foster community building around the SF things going on at City Tech. Also, some things are serendipitous, such as finding this 1963 yearbook buried in a container of books bound for recycling, books that had been thrown out to make room for the collection. I took a photo of the cover and turned it into the header image for the site, and it's remained so ever since. The Science Fiction at City Tech site serves a variety of purposes and serves different audiences. The landing page for the site is a blog that documents anything SF related at the college. This includes updates on the collection, class visits to the collection, and scholars using the collection. It also includes special events and guest lectures that relate to SF. It has several link pages from the navigation menu at the top. The About page situates SF within the context of City Tech and defines the site's purpose, quote, Science Fiction at City Tech promotes the City Tech science fiction collection, the faculty who teach and research in the field, and the initiatives focused on or affiliated with science fiction at City Tech and CUNY, end quote. The People page highlights some of the folks who work with SF at City Tech, including me, Mark, and Lavelle. The SF collection page highlights the City Tech science fiction collection. We'll look at that page in more detail in a moment. The annual Symposium page promotes upcoming and past symposia that have been held each year since acquiring the collection. Samuel R. Delaney joined us for the second symposium in 2017, and Analog Science Fiction and Fact magazine partnered with us last year for the fourth symposium, which celebrated their 90th anniversary. The courses page includes information and a link to learning outcomes for English 2420, the science fiction, and a description of its interdisciplinary variant at the college. Finally, the resources page collects links and helpful documents for SF research and teaching. So now I'm going to switch over to the browser so we can look more closely at the SF collection page. So at the top of the content section of this page, you can see here's the menu, we have the header image, and then we begin meeting the content on the SF collection page. At the top is a landing video that gives a brief narrated tour of the collection as it is housed in the archives in what is now called the Library Building, L543C. Though I should point out the library only occupies the 4th and 5th floors of this building. Scrolling down, I provided location information and a link to the Archives and Special Collections page on the library's official website, followed by an establishing shot of the entrance of the library on the 4th floor of the library building. Next, there's a broad overview of the collection with an emphasis on the big 3 SF magazines held in the collection. And then finally, the real magic is in these links in the bulleted list at the bottom of the page. The list begins with a link to the access policy that Wynette, Clyde, and I wrote to set expectations and provide reasonable parameters for visitors using collections material. Wynette is the main point of contact for arranging visits, but I try to make myself available to pull materials and meet with visitors when my schedule permits. The next set of links one to a non-editable, shareable version of the spreadsheet that serves as the finding aid for the collection, and PDFs of each separate sheet within the main spreadsheet. Visitors can use these to search the collection's holdings and let us know what they would like to see during their visit. Next, I included a photographic inventory of each shelf in the collection that I made after we had completed shelving. It is a sequential set of photos that follows the shelf ordering that I put into this sketch of the collection stack. So I include both the link to the inventory as well as this sketch, which helps a visitor understand how things are organized. Now, the photographic inventory serves two purposes. Originally, it helped me work from home to enter information that I could glean from book and magazine spines, so that I would spend less time in the archives collecting the rest of the information for each item. Also, it provides a means of browsing the collection as you might in a library or bookstore. Due to limitations on resources, the finding aid is not yet integrated into the library's catalog, so I included a separate link to the catalog here so that folks will be able to also find other SF resources, novels as well as scholarly work that we have in circulation. And then finally, there are links to the resources page where there are SF research database links like the Internet Speculative Fiction Database that researchers can use to cross-reference with the information in the finding aid, as well as a link to Laura Schmidt's helpful Using Archives, a Guide to Effective Research, which might be useful to visitors planning out their visit to the collection. So what went into building the finding aid? As I mentioned, it began with the photographic inventory. Using a wide-angle lens, I took one photo of each shelf in sequential order, beginning with the topmost shelf on the first stack in row 116, or 116.1.1. Added these to a Google Photos album, created a shareable link, and added the link to the collections page on the Science Fiction at City Tech website. I use this for data entry reference. Visitors can use this to browse the shelves remotely. To create the finding aid, I chose Google Drive and its Google Sheets cloud-based spreadsheet app for a number of reasons. The collected information was stored remotely. It is easily shared with others for viewing or collaboration. Multiple people can work on the same document simultaneously. Data would be publicly available for research, and public-facing web and PDF deliverables are easily created. I created a Google Sheet document titled City Tech Science Fiction Collection Inventory and divided it into 4 sheets. The first sheet is for magazines. It includes shelf location, magazine title, date, volume and number if available, and notes. The second sheet is for scholarship and anthologies. Due to some overlap in their shelving, it includes location, title, author or editor, publisher, and notes. This is the most sparse list as any relevant information such as second edition could be added to notes without having to input the publication date for each individual item. This missing data can be entered later when time permits. The third sheet is for academic journals, which includes columns for location, title, volume, number, date, and notes. And the fourth sheet is for novels, which includes columns for location, author 1 last, author 2 last, title, publisher, year, edition, notes, author 2 last, and author 2 first. The plan is to fill in gaps when time and resources permit, and eventually to integrate the finding aid's data into the library's catalog, but these are admittedly long-term goals. The thing to remember is that I wanted to make the collection as usable and accessible without any funding or release time. So I focused on what is the minimal information needed for each finding aid so that it could be created as quickly as possible. That being said, I spent many hours at home or in the archives inputting information. Colleagues and students helped out tremendously too. Lavelle, student Jessica Roman, Professor Lucas Kwan, Professor Laura Westengard all helped with this. With all that effort, it only took us 3 years to build the finding aid. Since creating the finding aid, the library worked hard to open up more shelf space. Before the pandemic, I added some boxed mystery magazines, including Alfred Hitchcock Presents and Ellery Queen, and our Professor Our colleague Professor Aaron Barlow gave us a huge collection of Philip K. Dick fiction and scholarship, which all need to be added to the finding aid. That being said, using these tools, we've inventoried the majority of the collection in situ. Now we know that there are 10,519 items inventoried on the shelves, which includes 4,147 SF magazines, 4,081 novels, 658 anthologies, 1,038 monographs, and 595 scholarly journals. These numbers will grow after campus reopens and we can begin working in the collection again. In closing, I'd like to give a plug for a blog post that I wrote recently called Notes on a Science Fiction Walking Tour in New York City. It's nothing fancy, but it can give you an idea about how things have changed and also remained the same in the city at some important SF-related sites, such as those related to amazing stories, astounding science fiction, and the writer Isaac Asimov. Thanks for listening. Please let me know if you'd like to discuss this further.